Okay, I'm going to introduce the chair of our next, or the moderator of our next session, the keys to unlocking a decarbonised transport system. Delighted to introduce William Soper, who is the head of sustainability services at DEKRA. William, over to you.
Fantastic. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, fantastic. So, hello everyone, good morning. Welcome to the first headline talk of today's session at Innovation Zero. Today's topic of conversation, the keys to unlocking decarbonised transport. We will hear from some thought leaders involved in this sector, people deeply involved and influential within their respective fields. If you have any questions, please use the code and there will be a microphone coming around at the end of the session as well. So how can we encourage people to embrace low carbon mobility? How can we incentivise people toward using public transport? How do we kick the dependency on ICE, the internal combustion engine? To answer these questions, we are privileged to be joined by esteemed panellists, and in no particular order from those closest to me, the former Minister of Transport for the Government of Gibraltar, now consulting in mobility and infrastructure, the Honourable Paul Balban, Bicycle Mayor for Gibraltar as well, an arm of the BYCS. The Managing Director for Mobilityways, Julie Furnell, providing powerful climate tech solutions to tackle the 5% of commuting emissions in the UK with her team of commutologists, and Britain's most successful Paralympian. She has won 16 medals, including 11 golds, and relevant to this discussion, she spent 10 years on the board at Transport for London, Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson, member of the House of Lords and chair at UK Active. I will be your moderator, William Soper. I am very interested to listen what they have to say. What's the value of a net zero transition? £12,000 every single second, if we're faster. £700,000 every single minute. Models presented by the Institute of Chemical Engineers estimated a saving of at least £9.5 trillion globally if we can achieve a faster transition to net zero. Transportation underpins that global economy. Mobility is essential for social interaction, commerce and community. It forms an integral part of our lives at home, at work and in everyday travel, even reaching this talk today. Today, to decarbonise the transportation sector, we still need to reduce approximately 80% of oil products from daily transport. So, if we excluded the front two rows, every other participant and listener today would need to find an alternative mode of transportation today. So, now let's hear some thoughts on how we address that challenge. I'm going to come really to Jules first, but to all panellists. What are the biggest challenges when it comes to the transportation sector today?
Well, like you rightly said, the commute is a huge challenge when it comes to decarbonising transport. As you said, it's 5% of all emissions in the UK. That's emitting 18 million tonnes of CO2 per annum. It's huge. And more often than not, it's deprioritised. Scope 3 is not yet a scope which is mandatorily required for large organisations to report on, yet it is one of the things that is seriously impacting our ability to get to net zero. So if I think of the challenges within that challenge, one of the key things that we're finding that is a barrier of adoption for large organisations and their employees to travel more sustainably to work is infrastructure. The ability for people to have accessibility to public transport, the uptake on EV adoption is increasing, but there's still EV anxiety around, can it actually go the distance that we need to go to get to where we want to get to, and if we're wanting to travel a bit further, will I be able to charge my vehicle in a timely manner that doesn't cause inconvenience to my journey? So there are issues around infrastructure. The average commute to work is around 17 miles, so it's kind of, for those of us that are more active, cycling may be possible, but for a lot of us who aren't, professional cyclists, that active travel again just wouldn't be an option. And the safety aspect of that around some of the roads and lack of cycling lanes, There's huge infrastructure issues for people to actually make the right change. So that, for me, is a fundamental challenge that we're seeing and we're trying to overcome with large organisations.
No, it's fantastic. And, you summarised very succinctly the need for improvements in infrastructure. Paul, is that sort of a shared experience in your world in Gibraltar as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I come from a very small place. It's very different to London, and our problems are smaller, and yet sometimes they're bigger than what you get in cities. For people to be able to adopt, and for us to be able to encourage as policymakers for people to adopt sustainable alternative modes of transport, this infrastructure needs to be meaningful. If it's the bus service needs to take you from where you are to where you're going in a way which requires less effort. What I dealt in the final part of my political career was bicycle lanes. I'm passionate about bicycles and I'm passionate about active travel. And we're all pedestrians. Once we park our cars or leave the bus stop, we are walking, and for me it is very important that our pavements are accessible, that our bicycle lanes are also accessible to everyone, and that people feel safe and they're willing to take that step. Otherwise we're fighting a battle which we won't get there, and it is extremely important that we do everything that we can. It's great to look at the big things that companies need to do, that cities need to do, that countries need to do, but there's what can we do as individuals. Well, I think walking more, cycling more, but again, it's a place. London is I've seen infrastructure, it's improved tremendously, but the quiet ways become, you're on the dual carriageway at some moments in time, and that is daunting. So just to summarize, it's the infrastructure needs to be meaningful.
So still infrastructure really key, it sounds like, in the challenges of today. Tanni, is that your experience as well, or do you have any other challenges you think are really important for the sector?
From my point of view, it's all those challenges, but how you build in accessibility. So I live in the northeast of England, but I work in London. And so it is very different. You talk about, in London, about active travel, get off a bus stop earlier. Where I live, a bus stop earlier is 2.5 miles down the road. The lack of accessibility is a massive issue. So I use trains a lot. Trains were meant to be step-free in the UK by January the 1st, 2020. That's been completely and utterly missed. It's now going to be 100 years before I can get on a train without the permission or support of a non-disabled person. Buses are in London, there's wheelchair spaces, but they're really poorly policed. So it's incredibly difficult for disabled people to access transport in the way that most people probably in the room today has been able to access. So the nearest tube station here for me is Earl's Court. And I had to make a very complicated route to get to Earl's Court this morning. I kind of feel like I'm having a bit of a rant, but I would love to have a bike. The cheapest bike I can buy for my chair is about £6,000, and that has 3 gears. So everything costs more, and I do a lot of campaigning for trains and buses, but I come to the EV charging bit from the point of I was about to buy an electric car 18 months ago, was just about to sign the paperwork, and then thought probably should check where the nearest EV charging stations are that I can use, and there wasn't an accessible EV charging station within 50 miles of my house that I could use. And now I take pictures up and down the motorway. Pretty much all of them are inaccessible, and the government, it's guidance, it's complete waste of space, and I understand the pressure on the companies putting in the infrastructure, but disabled people have just forgotten a wheelchair accessible vehicle. Peugeot have just put one on Mobility, but every single step of the way it's hard for disabled people to kind of contribute, which is a shame because they want to. When straws were banned for quite sensible reasons, disabled people who need them were absolutely vilified. So it's just don't forget disabled people. That's and we're constantly forgotten.
Yeah, and I mean, there's 350 policy professionals from the UK government here today, as well as global representatives. What kind of decisions do we really need to take in our policy making and in the infrastructure sector to help with that change, do you think? Tanni?
I mean, for me, you've got to have disabled people around the table. If that doesn't happen, even then it's difficult. So I was on the Board of Transport for London when the Elizabeth line got put in. We were promised step-free to train the whole length. That kind of got forgotten. And it's now only the middle section that I can really use. So even with disabled people around the table, it's quite a challenge. And my final rant of the morning, people hide behind saying the 2012 Paralympics were amazing. They were stunning. They were the best thing that ever happened in my entire life. But it didn't change the world for disabled people. What the 2012 Paralympics gave us was step-free access at Green Park and King's Cross and less cobblestones on the South Bank. That's what it changed. So, yeah, we can still celebrate the games, but, I'll be dead before some of these things actually change. So, maybe we need a Minister for Transport who's disabled. That might change it a little bit.
And, you've actually worked within the transportation sector as well, Paul. With the integration of these kinds of local travel options, how do you still balance that in policy-making, decision-making? How do you make sure you're making the right decisions for policy and infrastructure? And how do you know maybe what are the symptoms when things are going wrong? Are there signs that you see in the transport sector today that we need to pay attention to?
It's very difficult. Again, Gibraltar is a different place completely. We, as politicians, we depend on our advisors, people who you'd expect to be on the ground, engineers, etc. I found that the people that were advising, they were very car-centric. They did not really want the change that I wanted to. So for me, the most important thing that I could do was actually go there. I had to step off the veranda. I had to live it. I had to get the bus, catch the bus to make sure that it's going where I want to go, see what happens during rush hour, see what happens during school times as the children all rush into the bus, what happens to the other people that want to catch the bus and can't because they're full to capacity. Also, things like bicycle lanes. I would tell my engineers, this corner is wrong, this curve is not going to do it. And they said to me, no, Minister, that's fine, that's how it should be. No, that's not right, because I had the experience that I cycled, so, and they insisted, and eventually I said, well, look, I'll put it to you in writing, and if anything happens, it'll be on, and they would then, whisper in a corner and say, we're going to change that corner. So you have to be there. I think you have to live it, and I think policymakers should be out there. But again, I was a cycling minister, so for me, it was easy for me. But for people who don't cycle, for example, and they wouldn't know. And I think the point I think is very important. The day that there is a transport minister who has, different needs, that is when things will change in that respect.
Fantastic. And you're sort of touching on sort of solutions there, and particularly in the corporate sector, Jules, where you operate and you work very closely. Yeah. Is that something that you see within businesses too? Is there urgency around that prioritisation for access? Or how can businesses take that forward step?
Yeah, I mean, the best policy that we could have for businesses is to make Scope 3 a mandatory reporting part of the picture. So it's not just Scopes 1 and Scopes 2, because it is important. And our clients, we are making traction. So we've worked with 700 large organisations in the UK. That has led us to try and influence 1 million individuals, employees for those organisations. And off the back of that, we've taken 1 billion miles off the road. But it's not going to be enough for us to hit our net zero goals. And for us, we start with you can't track what you don't measure. So the key for us in unlocking decarbonisation is actually... Sorry, I don't think these mics are a bit in and out.
No, okay.
Yes, the key for us is...
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Is that better, everyone? Okay. I was doing a bit of a Britney Spears then, so I'm sad about that. So the key for us is the data. So that's very much where we start with large organisations. Our proposition is measure, then reduce and report. And the measure piece is all about understanding art of the possible. So if all of your employees were to travel more sustainably, what are the options that are available to them? The realistic options, not getting a bus journey that's 2 times a driving journey, because that's not realistic for anybody. But what are the realistic, sustainable travel options for employees? And then how are they travelling today? So let's find out what they're doing, and then you start to see the opportunity for change and the opportunity that large employers have to influence their employees to travel more sustainably. And I think understanding that impact is fundamental, because I think a lot of us, the realisation isn't really there on, hopping in your car to drive down to the supermarket that's a mile down the road. I don't think we properly put that into perspective of the impact that has. We had Dr. Matthew Sawyer, he's a GP turned consultant, speak at our annual Zero Carbon Commuting Conference, which happens every October. And some of the key stats that he was sort of bringing led very nicely back into the NHS, which is one of the largest employers in the UK. So we do work with 82 NHS trusts. I'm not going to lie, it's slow. Trying to get things happening and get traction on the ground. But when you put in perspective of that as a large employer, 3.5% of all emissions in England relates to patients, visitors and staff travelling backwards and forwards for the NHS. That is absolutely astronomical. So that's basically 14% of total emissions in the UK is just from one large employer alone. So they have goals in place. They want to reduce emissions by 80% by 2030, but they've got a long way to go. And I am passionate that if they start with the commute, which I think is the low-hanging fruit of influence that they could enforce, then we can start to get that behaviour change.
Oh, fantastic. And it sounds like we need to take practical action and steps now, today. And companies are doing it. But also, I guess, Paul and Tanni, respectively, I'm sure there are other people today who have keys and solutions, and they may just need to turn it. Where would be the quick wins or the good places to start, do you think, within the transportation sector now? Because we started the journey, we've maybe got on top of Scope 1 and Scope 2. We're looking at Scope 3 in our travel and commute. Are there some solutions we should just be going straight to, or people we should be talking to and engaging in the conversation?
Yes, it's important to engage with people. One experience that I had is sometimes when you want to move forward, there is a huge amount of backlash. There's a lot of people that seem to be against. I think we need to be very aware of exactly what they represent, because, for example, what happened in Gibraltar, there was a massive pro-car lobby, which was incredible. I mean, they gave the impression that the government would lose elections. It was that bad, and because what we're doing is we're looking for that space. We look at that to regain that human space, because that is where the space lies to create green areas, to create better pedestrian infrastructure, to create better cycling lanes. And that's something which people are resistant to, because in Gibraltar we have one of the highest vehicle ownership rates in the world. We have a population of around 36,000 people, and there's around 48,000 vehicles in Gibraltar. We travel literally 500, 800 meters, maybe a kilometer to get to work. And people do that in their cars, and they do that on their own in their cars. And which is incredible. So, and I look at electrical infrastructure. Again, I'm speaking with my experience in terms of Gibraltar, because it's an affluent society and people can afford to have 3 cars per household. Then they will simply swap those 3 cars for EVs, and you'll still be stuck in that traffic jam at 8:30 in the morning. Okay, 0 tailpipe emission traffic jam, but you're still there. So the issue really is space. And how we take control of space, because that is our space. That's what we want for our children. And I've seen some changes in London since the last time I was here. I know Gibraltar House is in the Strand, and they have made that, they've made living space there. They've planted. I've seen a lot more areas which look amazing. So I think that is really important, to actually see, what people really want, and see how we can, again, and I think at first blush, the impression might be people don't want this, let's not do it. But I think you've got to physically, especially the policymaker, see what's right. And I think, as they say, build infrastructure, be it pavements or bicycle lane or better bus routes, non-convoluted bus routes, accessibility, and people will use that infrastructure.
Tanni, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, for me, I use a mixture of data and lived experience. So, the wheels of government turn really slowly, and getting to the right people can sometimes be quite challenging. They'll all sit and nod, and then a special advisor or so, minister, you can't do that. So, for me, I use my lived experience. So I tweet, or X, whatever it is now, quite a lot about my train experiences, not because I think it's a method to complain, but it highlights the issues to the wider public. So I nearly got left on a train last week. 12 people got on while I was waiting to get off. Every single person said to me, I'll go and find someone. So, that's amazing, because that's getting people to recognise the differences. When I was on the board of TfL, I spent about 3 years arguing about step-free tube stations. Kind of didn't really get anywhere. Then what I did was get a paper tube map, crossed out TfL and wrote Tanni on the front with a Sharpie, and then crossed out every station I couldn't use, and then in a different colour crossed out the accessible stations I've never used because I never need to go there, and that just made the rest of the board realise actually my journey versus their journey. The thing I do regularly now is, because I have to be at a train station more than 30 minutes before a non-disabled person, I just leave meetings and say, right, I've got to go now because I need to catch a train. It's like, but the meeting's not finished yet, but I can't do. So in a more subtle way, it's bringing it home to people who are in decision making. It's slow and it's painful, but for me, there's got to be a couple of ways of bringing it to the attention of people who can make decisions. And every single government since the Disability Discrimination Act came in have allowed derogations on track. They've just kicked the can down the road. And there's pockets of really good practice. Merseyside have done some amazing stuff with trains. Greater Anglia have got step-free trains in, although they had a bit of a blip. They took the ramps out from all their stations, even the ones that you still needed a ramp to get on, because they got a bit excited. And then they had to put them back. But, that's just really basic stuff that people need to think about doing in a different way.
What you're describing there is really like the toll on daily travel, really, and particularly the impact to even mental health of the commuter, right? We're going in to and from work, we're coming back home probably tired on the road potentially as well from the office every day. Jules, I know mental health and well-being is really important when it comes to the travel commute. Can you tell us a bit more about some of the considerations there as well?
Yeah, I mean, the commute is probably one of the most stressful journeys that all of us have to make. So you are essentially starting your day stressed, probably unable to access your office. The seasonality of poor weather that we have in this lovely country doesn't help with that either. And then there's also the mental health of people who are isolated and don't have accessibility to employment because either they don't drive or they've got a disability or something like that. So we've done a lot of work with Prologis Parks. They are landlords of huge hubs where businesses rent out space for distribution, so huge distribution centres. We've done a lot of work with them using our Commute IQ platform to overlay the actual accessibility to their business park. And what we found is by putting in some additional shuttle buses for clusters of people where we know that there's employment opportunity but low accessibility, the applications for those roles grew by 515% because people were incentivised by knowing they could get to site. So it's a huge factor.
So actually by uplifting and making that more accessible for everyone, the other tangible benefits start to realise themselves, which is really important. Part of this is trying to see the long-term value. It sounds like it's very easy to think short-term and look at the cost on paper and say, do we need to invest today? But the realisation of those benefits can really benefit companies, individuals on the road, longer term. For people like yourselves in the sector, how do we stay on task and on focus? Because this is a 6-year change to 2030. It's 26 years going to 2050. How do we continue to turn those right solutions in keys? Paul, do you want to come in on this at all?
I think it's very important that leaders are there with the right focus. They need to know exactly where they want to get to, and make sure that they plan those challenges. I think many of the targets, in some cases, will be difficult to achieve, but we need to have those targets there anyway. Again, coming back home, my ideal, and touching on mental health as well. I think if you're close enough to home, if you're close enough to work, definitely active travel will help in terms of mental health for sure. I mean, cycling makes you smile, makes people that cycle smile. Everyone that cycles knows that. And even walking, I think, eliminates the stress of having to get on an underground or having to get on a bus which is full of people and crowded. So I think we need to see, what people want, plan ahead, and make sure that we can, in our own jurisdictions, we can achieve those targets, which are extremely important. When we spoke earlier about data, I did want to say, for such a small place, we're still 2 months away from reaching the full year. 750,000 hits on our bicycle counter on the bicycle lane that I created, and that's amazing in that respect. Unfortunately, it's not local, the local community using the bicycle lanes, it's the cross-frontier commuter that's using them. And I think that's also very important. You must also look at not just the local community, but who comes into your city in that respect, and how you can then, by segregating, e-scooters and bicycles off the road, it means that those people that need to use the road can do so in a better way, less stressful way, and in a more meaningful way. So I think there's pluses in every way. It's not all about bicycles, it's not all about walking, but by giving people the right tools to cycle and to walk, then the roads are freer for those that need to use them as well. So
it's a range of solutions we're bringing into the picture to alleviate transport cross-sector. And Jules, how do we incentivize those businesses and individuals to then adopt those different practices in the organisation? Because there's a whole range of tools. Are there some that you would recommend potentially to a business today?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's looking at the what's in it for me from an individual perspective, which I think means we have to cover the E, the S and the G. When it comes to it. So a lot of people are motivated by the environmental factors, and off the back of that, surfacing the impact that they're having by travelling more sustainable is important. But that's not going to tick the box for everyone. So we've processed around 750,000 sets of data through our platform, and it shows that 95% of those people have a sustainable option, they just don't take it. That's not to say the willing list isn't there to take a more sustainable option. So when we really delve into the data, and we run an annual commuter census survey, so some of the data from that shows that the susceptibility to change, around 36% of those people are open and willing. It's just that maybe they're not getting the right information at the right time to make that change.
Which is fantastic, because if we've got 80% of the room that need to decarbonise and 95% have got a more sustainable option, that already shows that we could take steps now, really. Yeah. One thing that Claire touched upon in her opening remarks is that the idea of having a strategy, a roadmap for how we decarbonise and we go towards net zero moving forward. I guess one of the questions I'd have for each of you as panellists is, if we were helping with that plan, what would we make sure to put in it today? And I think you've covered some of those points, but what would be the key goal, really, do you think, for some of those plans? I'll start with you, Tanni.
I think we have to think about active travel in a different way. I think I'm doing a lot of work around how children get to school, and just how many cars you see around the school gates. There was one project I worked on where literally opening the back gate of the school and redoing a bit of a path fundamentally changed something like 85% of how the children got to school, because they didn't need to be dropped off in cars, because to get dropped off the front they had to cross like 3 major roads. I mean, it's just really simple things. But also, my background sport, we need to think much more cleverly about how we get people being active, because if you're active you're more likely to cycle. One thing we saw in lockdown, which was amazing, was a number of women who started riding bikes. And there was nothing else to do, and I was a bit psycho. I started shouting at women about telling them how to put their seat height, because most of the men, to be fair, have the wrong seat height, but they weren't enjoying cycling because something really stupid, they didn't know how to set the seat height for their bike. So we've got to fundamentally change how young people think about physical activity, so that then fits through the whole of their life. And then it comes back to the NHS that we spend 10 billion a year on diabetes in the UK. A lot of that type 2 can be fixed with activity, and you start keeping people out of the hospital because you've changed what young people are doing. government never joins up. And we all talk about we need it joined up, but... Yeah.
Well, I think that's very succinct. So we really need to make sure we're taking action at a local level and in a joined up way to make sure that the plan makes sense really for the individual. Paul?
Yeah, I think we need to empower people, especially children. I'm involved in what we call a pedal-ready cycle proficiency course, which is to empower children and people who are scared of cycling on the road to be able to do so safely, so in the hope that they can cycle to school and that the parents will allow them to cycle to school. So that's one of the ways. Even things like cycling buses, where responsible people will wait for children to cycle with them to school, or at least for a couple of weeks till they feel confident. So I think that is really, really important, because that will create a healthier community, and then it helps the environment, it helps health, it helps mental health, it's all encompassing really, and it decreases the stress in travel, so that creates a much better community. Things like even creating emission-free zones around schools as well, which is something which we've started to do in Gibraltar now as well. All that will help people, and we're even now we're again, a project I left behind was to make, there's a road that has 3 schools, and make that road a living street, whereby only parents who must drop off their children by car will do so, but that road will remain closed to traffic, just open to residents during out of term times, etc. So that I think is also extremely important, because that will also facilitate.
Fantastic. And Jules, what would you add in?
I think there's other governments that are doing it a lot better than us. So France, for example, have implemented an incentive around carpooling for your first and your 10th car share. There are 200 million empty seats every day on the roads in the mornings travelling to work. So if we could fill some of those seats, reduce the number of vehicles, reduce congestion, reduce pollution. For a diesel vehicle driving through an urban area, you're taking 12 minutes off the community's life. So there's some hard facts that we need to be flagging around the way that we're behaving and the impact that is having.
So as a global community, we really need to learn from each other as well, and different governments. No, fantastic. So I think we have some time for questions and answers from the audience. I think there should be a microphone as well. If people would like to ask a question, please raise your hand. Off in the front row here.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. My name is David and I'm from Bikeworks, and I've been working in cycling and attending conferences since 2002, and I've kind of heard the same conversation then that I'm hearing now, and a lot of suggestions about changing behaviour and getting people out of cars. I just wonder, how can we fast forward this from today till next year rather than another 20 years?
Paul, do you want to come in first, and Jules as well?
Yeah, I think I go to many conferences, many bicycle conferences, and I think it's a difficult one, because we need to make, again, it comes down to infrastructure again. I think cities, countries, governments need to create that infrastructure, because I think that is key. When people feel confident and people feel safe to ride on those roads, they will. Also bicycle parking, so you need to have places to park your bicycles close to home, close to the train station, because then there's also multimodal transport. Sometimes you need to go further away, so you need to have space to park your bicycle at the train station, just like you need to have space to park your bicycle at home. I circumvent all that because I'm a Brompton user, so I can fold it up and take it with me everywhere. It comes home with me and to work with me, etc. But there are many things. You're right, it's a slow process. I have battled 12 years. It took me 12 years to create bicycle infrastructure in Gibraltar, because first time round I thought, well, let's try to fix our roads. It didn't happen. Build a few roundabouts, try to improve traffic flow. It didn't happen. At the very end, in the twilight of I said, look, I'm going to do this because it's now or never. As I mentioned earlier, the backlash was incredible, the insults, the booing, because I'm actually on the street. But I think we need to focus on the positivity and try our best to continue providing that infrastructure, because I think that is the key in moving forward.
Jules as well, Tanni?
So you are absolutely right. The first COP conference was held in 1995, and when you look at the data, very little has changed. That's why we focus on large employers, because they can be incredibly influential. So they can implement policy that prevents single occupancy vehicle coming to site, and they can incentivise their employees to do that. So we work with the likes of Mercedes, for example, who were incentivising their staff with a free lunch. Every time they authenticated that they shared a journey to work rather than driving alone, they gave a free lunch. Heathrow are trying to do it with their staff by offering a coffee to the tarmac workers, and it's having a huge uptake in the amount of people that are actually starting to think differently. But it does kind of take a bit of a nudge for people to do that.
Oh, fantastic. Tanni, is there anything you want to add as well?
Yeah, I mean, some of it comes back. Young people aren't going to solve it all. If I was Education Minister, I would fundamentally change how the school days run, which actually it's about bringing in more activity every day. And it's how you get people to think about this from a young age, because I see loads of kids and parents as well. I'm a mum. You're kind of terrified about your kids going out on bikes and doing things and getting the bus on her own, and she's 22 now. So, it's we've got to start getting people to think differently. And if you don't know what's in front of you, then you can't. So, I'm very proud. I don't know if any of you have seen I've got a scooter attachment, which I use. I go on the bike paths around London. It's amazing. I don't use taxis. I try to be as sustainable as I can. But again, the cost of that, the vast majority of disabled people can't afford one of those. And so, yeah, it comes back. We've got to educate. And in the economic climate we're in, we've also got to recognise there's a lot of people who don't really have a choice because they can't afford to do things necessarily in the way that we want. So we've got to take that into account as well.
So sort of education, incentives, and then
I love the
also,
incentives.
Yeah, incentives, absolutely,
Yeah.
and safety as well, I guess, on the road, that we feel safe every day. Any other questions in the audience? No, just there. Oh.
Thank you. My name is Edward Lee. I work in local government, and you've had a lot of talk about infrastructure and the need for infrastructure, safe infrastructure for cycling particularly, and it's local government that delivers that. But what we're lacking is a continuous funding stream to have a rolling programme of building it. We're constantly jumping from one project funded by a pot of money from government. The team gets disbanded, and then we apply for another some more funding, and it stop-start. And it's the same with electrification of the railways. It's basically build up a team with expertise, and then they can just roll out efficiently, going from place to place to place. And until we get that, we're going to be, it's going to take, 100 years to get us anywhere close to having the infrastructure to enable people who can cycle to cycle.
And I mean, is there anything you'd like to add to that, or?
Yeah, so I probably should declare I'm president of the Local Government Association. So, the short-term funding agreements are really not helpful. Health and social care in so many places is taking up 50-60% of the budget. So we've got to think differently about health and social care as well. So there's more money to spend on other things. And you're absolutely right. It's anybody working in local government, some of the priorities and choices that are having to be made are really difficult. I know one council, one looked after child, cost $1.5 million a year because of the complex background. And so what do? Do you fix potholes, or do you look after? I mean, it's really almost impossible decisions that are being taken. So I do think central government do have a role to play in overseeing some of this and just providing more continuity. I mean, the levelling up bill, which I worked on, I mean, couldn't quite get my head what we're levelling up to. There's a bit of an assumption that the levelling up, the north is being levelling up to the south, and all sorts of very complicated things that I'm not sure it'll achieve half of what it was meant to. And that's my frustration with legislation. We've been waiting for a Great British Railways bill for forever, and actually the election's going to be sooner rather than later. That probably won't get through. And that's a really important piece of legislation that will help rail travel, but who knows?
So again, coming back to before, having some sort of joined up plan and strategy that has continuity for it as well is probably going to be quite critical. It does need a home, I guess, within the UK in that respect. And you're right, these decisions are never going to be easy, I think, as well. So it's always a balance. I think it's 56% of companies have KPIs for sustainability or their travel, but 48% feel that they don't have the resources that they can balance and execute that. So it is a constant balancing act, I think, within the transportation sector. Is there anything else you'd like to add as well, Paul?
I mean, funding is a massive issue, and I always say it's like buying a new house and getting a mortgage, and you have to decide whether you want a sofa and buy a bed and maybe you have to stagger it along. I mean, I had to compete with my peers for funding, and there was always things which are more important than bicycle lanes and infrastructure, always more important. So I was a bit cheeky in that respect. So I had a pot of money which was for the sustainable transport, traffic and parking plan. And in my last year I decided to spend it all on bicycle infrastructure. So I spent, it's not an awful lot of money, but for Gibraltar it is, £1.2 million on bicycle infrastructure, because I knew I was going to have one chance and I had to do it. So, but other than that, it's funding will always be the issue. We have, again, our buses now are starting to come to an age where, they're diesel buses, we need to look at electrification, but the price of an electric bus is huge, and instead of buying them, maybe sequentially, a few every year, and always having a few new buses every year, you tend to wait, and it's never the right time. Then you have to buy 22 buses in one go, which for a small town is hugely, it's impossible. So it's planning out, and having, the budget assigned properly to each different department.
Jules, anything you want to add?
I mean, again, it's why we try and work with employers. We're under no illusion, despite the amount of lobbying that we do, that shared mobility is going to be high up on the agenda. It's just not. So it's why we try to work with the private and the public sector, who do have sustainability budgets. But again, we're trying to champion that. Don't deprioritise Scope 3. It is the low-hanging fruit where you can make a tangible difference.
So partnership between communities, government, and also with organisations as well is going to be critical. Are there any other questions as well in the audience? Fantastic. So as with all these panels, I'm going to end with a quick question to my panellists. So for the audience here today, if they're going to take home 1 point that they think about, and I guess for the travel home on the train, the bus, the tube, what would you like them to think about and come away with today? Tanni, should we start with?
This is like the last question on Newsnight, isn't it? When you're meant to be funny but meaningful. I just think about accessibility for everybody. Just, at the heart of everything you do, think about how it would just be easier for everyone to be able to travel.
Fantastic. Jules?
I spoke about small nudges. As individuals, if we could just think about the next journey we're taking, and even if it's 1 trip a week, 1 trip a month, just doing it in a more sustainable way, understanding the options available to you, and making those incremental changes and changing those travel habits, that will make a tangible difference on us being able to get to net zero. And if you work in a large business, be a champion for sustainable travel. Send them our way, and we'll help sort them out.
Brilliant. Paul?
Yeah, and I agree totally with that. I think if there's one thing that we can do ourselves is influence the way we travel. So if you can find better ways of going about, getting to work, getting back home, getting to the supermarket, getting back. I mean, look at all the options available, be them bicycles. Nowadays with cargo bicycles, there's just so many possibilities. You can take children to school in cargo bikes. You can pick up your shopping on cargo bikes. So just look at everything. We're in total control. I know we look at cities and countries and the world, to tell us what we should be doing, and we say, well, our effort is not that great really compared to what the other countries need to do, but every little bit counts, and if we can sort of change the way that we are moving, then it'll affect and it'll bounce back on our children and the people around us, and slowly it's a wave that will catch, and that will help create that better place.
Thank you, Paul. So thank you so much to our esteemed panellists for your valuable insights today, and let's have a round of applause for them for the fantastic contributions. Thank you.